Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Poetry. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Denise Levertov's poem, What Were They Like? I'm going to take 5 key moments from the poem and analyse them fully, looking at language structure and form. If you want a detailed deep dive on form and context, do check out my other video that is in the playlist. But for now, get your flashcards and let's get started. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at a few little moments from the poem. I'm always going to just pop the question up in the top corner, just so you know which part of the Q&A we're dealing with. So, and I probably won't do much analysis of them. I think I'll probably just focus more on the responses. But it's worth just pointing out that obviously this is the first question and it very clearly introduces the topic of the questions of this report: did the people of Vietnam use lanterns of stone? And the responses: sir, their light hearts turned to stone, it is not remembered. And then it talks about whether or not they used lanterns of stone to illuminate the way. So the first thing that you're probably going to draw attention to is the level of formality, the fact that it opens with a response of sir. So the suggestion is that the person answering the questions is speaking to someone of seniority or superiority, even though they're not the ones with the kind of expert knowledge on Vietnam. You'll notice here that we've got an adjective being used. So what the person responding is doing is he's taking the language of the question and he's twisting it. So saying, well, don't worry about whether or not they lit their way with stone lanterns. It's their light hearts that turn to stone. So he's playing with this word light, using it as an adjective here, suggesting that the Vietnamese people were very happy and peaceful, but obviously he's drawing attention to the fact that he's asking about the lighting system. He's like, well, actually it's their light hearts that turned to stone. A very, very powerful metaphor that suggests that either a kind of an obliteration of their light because all of the peace is gone, or kind of hardening. Now, you'll also remember, remember that we've got these passive constructions. So it is not remembered. Now, by using passive voice, what the writer is doing is taking away the agent of the sentence. So it suggests, rather than it being like, oh, I don't know, I don't remember, or people don't remember, it is just not remembered. So it makes it universal that this part of the culture has really, really been destroyed and completely taken away. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is the very, very short response to the question, were they inclined to quiet laughter? And again, we've got this repetition between the language. Now, again, you'll notice it's another formal address of sir. There's this repetition, and you might be picking up that because of the tone of the responses and the way that the language of the question is sort of recasted in a much more sort of negative way, that this formality feels somewhat ironic. The person answering the question sounds perhaps even angry. And he says, sir, laughter is bitter to the burned mouth. So we've got this plosive alliteration here, that but sound, really creating that sort of sense of harshness. And we've got a very, very emotive language with this adjective choice about being bitter. So again, there's this sort of sense of, I almost read it as if saying, why are you asking about the way they laughed? Laughter is bitter to the burned mouth. You might wonder what the writer is actually getting at when they talk about the burned mouth. Now, this could well be an allusion to Agent Orange, which was a chemical that was sprayed over all of the kind of crops and all of the forest land. And it had absolutely horrific consequences. It was highly corrosive. It got into the water and everything, and it meant that, you know, for years and years and years and years and years, people suffered from various different conditions, but including sort of birth defects, cancer. I mean, absolutely horrendous. So the corrosive nature of the acid, the chemical, is possibly there being referred to with burned. Okay, the fifth question asks, had they an epic poem? Now, if you didn't know what an epic poem is basically a huge poem, often used to kind of tell stories and reflect lives. So it's basically saying, did they have a very, a culture of writing poetry that reflected their lives. Now, in this response, sorry, it's a massive chunk that I've put down, but I have actually cut a load out. One of the things to be aware of is that this is one of the stanzas that has the longest stanza length, and it's echoing the fact that they're talking about an epic poem, and what the writer does, or what Levertov does, is she creates this really kind of peaceful atmosphere. It becomes very kind of lyrical in tone, and then breaks it with the violence. So you'll notice that we've got the same passive construction being repeated here. It is not remembered, so the same idea, it just globally, universally, it is not remembered. There is no memory left, it has been obliterated. And then we've got this very clever bit of repetition. It's called anadiplosis, which is when you repeat something at the end of a phrase and then then at the beginning of the phrase. If you're not going to remember that, just call it repetition, okay? But anadiplosis if you want something fancy. But this, remember, is targeted to the person that he's speaking of. It's a reminder, remember, you know, use your knowledge. Most were peasants, and then it gives them quite sort of factual information at that point. And then, like I said, it becomes a lot more lyrical, and you've got this personification of the clouds, when peaceful clouds were reflected in the paddies. So the paddies are like where they grow the rice fields, and so you've got sort of growth, but you also have reflection because there's a lot of water. So that's the beginning of this kind of metaphor here. When peaceful clouds were reflected in the paddies, when bombs smashed those mirrors. Okay, so look at the choice of verb here, smashed. Very dynamic verb. It suggests total obliteration, but it's an extension of this metaphor of the mirrors, like these rice fields that are reflective. These mirrors are smashed, they're obliterated. But it could also be in reference to the epic poem, i.e. the epic poem is like a mirror of their culture, and any epic poems that they might have had have now been completely destroyed. And then obviously we have this really, really harrowing line, there was only time to scream. Now I've said here, like, look at these references to time, because we've got this moment suggesting the urgency, and that when the bombs came down, they came down so quick that all there was to scream. But you also have these utterances begin when peaceful clouds, when bombs smashed. So they're adverbials of time being used to begin the lines. So again, it's a suggestion. Sorry, you know, I've bounced up and down a little bit. Sorry about that. Yeah, so these adverbials of time are almost creating this sort of like movement in time. So there was the time of peace, and then when bombs smashed these mirrors. So it's the kind of sequence of events being drawn attention to. Okay, folks, did they distinguish between speech and singing? Now we've got a new passive construction, it was reported. Again, making it very ambiguous as to who is doing the reporting. And also it was reported doesn't, it's not definitive, it was just reported as such, that their singing resembled the flight of moths in the moonlight. So we've got this analogy here that their voices did sound a little bit like singing, and that in itself was like the flights of moths in the moonlight. So we've got this rather delightful image of something so sort of light and airy, but then at the same time you could argue it's fragile, it's vulnerable, and the fact that they're sort of searching for light. Moths tend to search for light, but there's a kind of danger in that. And we've got this alliteration here as well, the moths and the moonlight, nasal alliteration. I think this is all about creating this sort of sense of peace here in the way that we're meant to imagine their language. And then the very last line of the poem that comes immediately after this is so, so powerful. Who can say it is silent now? So obviously we start off with this question, rhetorical question, i.e. there is no one who can answer this question, and then the question is answered. Now this is called hyperphora. If you couldn't remember that, you could just say the poet poses a question and then answers it. But the fact is that the answer doesn't actually give any kind of conclusion or any closure, because metaphorically they're saying it is silent now, i.e. there are no answers, there is no way of knowing. So we're left without closure. And obviously, if you've watched my context video, you'll know that she wrote this in the midst of the Vietnamese War. And so what she's saying is this is like issuing a warning. If it carries on, there will be no Vietnam left. We won't be able to ask these questions because it will be gone. So very, very fitting for the message of her poem. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you very much for watching. Do give me a shout if you've got any questions and I will do my very best to get back to you. Hope all is going well. Happy revising.